The door closes, and everything you thought you knew stops mattering. In Baltimore's correctional system, there are rules in the handbook, and then there are the real rules. Rules that determine whether you survive your first week or become a statistic. Where sitting in the wrong seat at lunch can cost you everything. Where one wrong look, one misunderstood gesture, one borrowed item you can't pay back changes your entire sentence. According to documented cases, former inmates, and correctional records, these are the rules that shock every new arrival. Some learn them in time. Others don't get that chance. This is what really happens when the door closes behind you in Baltimore. The Baltimore City Detention Center stands as a fortress of concrete and razor wire in the heart of Maryland's largest city. For decades, this facility, and others like it throughout Baltimore's correctional system, has served as the first stop for thousands of individuals entering the criminal justice system. What awaits them inside represents a jarring departure from the outside world, governed by rules and regulations that can overwhelm even the most mentally prepared newcomer. According to public records and documented accounts from correctional officials, the initial intake process at Baltimore's detention facilities operates under strict protocols designed for institutional security. The Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services maintains comprehensive guidelines that govern every aspect of inmate processing, from the moment an individual arrives in custody to their eventual classification and housing assignment. The first rule that shocks new inmates is immediate and absolute. Personal identity is fundamentally redefined. Upon entry, individuals surrender not just their freedom, but their clothing, personal effects, and in many ways, their individuality. Maryland correctional policy requires complete inventory of all personal property, which is cataloged, stored, or disposed of according to institutional regulations. Inmates receive standardized uniforms, typically color-coded based on security classification, that immediately mark their status within the system. Documented procedures indicate that new arrivals undergo thorough searches following protocols established by the American Correctional Association. These searches, conducted for security purposes, represent one of the most jarring experiences for first-time inmates. The process aims to prevent contraband entry and maintain institutional safety, but the invasiveness of these procedures often constitutes the first profound shock to personal dignity that inmates experience. Communication with the outside world operates under strictly controlled parameters. According to Maryland Department of Public Safety regulations, all phone calls from detention facilities are monitored and recorded, with clear warnings provided to both parties. Phone access is limited to specific hours, and inmates must typically use collect calling systems or prepaid phone accounts managed by contracted vendors. The cost structure for these calls has been the subject of public debate and regulatory reform efforts, with documented rates historically exceeding standard commercial rates by significant margins. Visitation rights, while constitutionally protected in principle, operate under extensive restrictions. Public records show that Baltimore's correctional facilities implement comprehensive screening procedures for all visitors. Background checks, dress code requirements, and behavioral guidelines must be followed strictly. Documented cases from Maryland courts have addressed disputes over visitation restrictions, establishing the legal framework that balances institutional security with inmates' rights to maintain family connections. The food service system in Baltimore's jails operates according to nutritional standards mandated by state and federal regulations, but the reality often shocks new inmates accustomed to dietary choice and variety. Documented meal schedules typically provide 3 meals daily, with caloric content meeting minimum nutritional requirements established by correctional health authorities. However, the quality, presentation, and limited options frequently represent a significant adjustment. Special dietary accommodations exist for documented medical or religious requirements, but inmates must navigate formal request procedures through institutional channels. Sleep and personal space exist under conditions dramatically different from outside norms. According to capacity reports and facility documentation, Baltimore's correctional facilities have historically faced overcrowding challenges. Court documents and Inspector General reports have documented instances where double bunking and dormitory-style housing created conditions where personal space measures mere feet. Lockdown schedules dictate when inmates can be outside cells, with documented counts occurring multiple times daily, requiring all inmates to be present and accounted for at their assigned locations. The commissary system provides access to approved items beyond basic institutional provisions, but operates under strict regulations. Maryland correctional policy permits inmates to purchase specific approved items, ranging from hygiene products to snacks, using funds deposited into institutional accounts. However, the markup on commissary items and the limited selection often surprise new inmates. Documented price lists show significant cost increases compared to retail prices, attributed to security screening, vendor contracts, and institutional overhead. Medical and mental health care follows protocols established under the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, but access operates differently than in the community. According to documented procedures, inmates must submit written requests for medical attention, which are triaged by correctional health staff. Emergency situations receive immediate response, but routine care often involves waiting periods. The quality and timeliness of correctional health care in Maryland facilities has been subject to oversight reports, legal challenges, and ongoing reform efforts. Perhaps most shocking to new inmates is the rigid hierarchy and unwritten social codes that govern daily interactions. While official rules are documented in inmate handbooks provided during intake, the informal power structures and social dynamics operate according to unwritten rules passed down through institutional culture. Correctional officers, documented in training materials and policy manuals, maintain security through a combination of formal authority and practical knowledge of institutional dynamics. The totality of these rules, formal and informal, creates what correctional experts term prisonization, the process by which inmates adapt to institutional life. Research published in criminological journals documents how this adaptation process affects individuals differently based on prior experience, sentence length, and personal resilience. For first-time inmates in Baltimore's facilities, the cumulative shock of these rules and restrictions represents a fundamental transformation of daily existence that many describe as among their most difficult life experiences. Beyond the official regulations printed in inmate handbooks and recited during intake orientation, Baltimore's correctional facilities operate according to a complex web of unwritten rules that new inmates must learn quickly for their own safety and survival. These informal codes, while not appearing in any Maryland Department of Public Safety manual, govern daily life with consequences that can be severe and immediate. According to documented accounts from correctional staff and former inmates interviewed by journalists and researchers, the first unwritten rule involves understanding respect hierarchies within the institution. Public records from incident reports and disciplinary hearings reveal that violations of perceived respect, including eye contact protocols, walking patterns in common areas, and verbal exchanges, have resulted in documented altercations. Correctional officers trained in institutional dynamics recognize these social structures, though official policy does not acknowledge them explicitly. The dining hall operates under particularly strict informal codes. Documented incident reports from Baltimore facilities indicate that seating arrangements follow unspoken territorial boundaries. New inmates who inadvertently sit in established areas have been involved in conflicts serious enough to require administrative intervention and disciplinary segregation. Correctional administrators, in testimony before oversight committees, have acknowledged the existence of these dynamics while maintaining that official policy prohibits such territorial behavior. Personal property management extends beyond official regulations into informal territory. While institutional rules govern what items inmates may possess, the unwritten code addresses borrowing, trading, and debt relationships. Court documents from cases involving institutional violence have revealed that commissary debts and trading disputes have escalated into serious incidents. Maryland correctional policies formally prohibit trading and gambling, but documented enforcement patterns suggest these activities persist despite official sanctions. Shower and bathroom facilities present unique challenges governed by both security protocols and informal etiquette. According to facility layouts documented in architectural records and security assessments, Many Baltimore detention facilities feature communal shower areas with limited privacy partitions. Correctional health and safety guidelines mandate minimum sanitation standards, but the timing, duration, and behavioral expectations during hygiene activities follow unwritten norms that new inmates must navigate carefully. The telephone system, while governed by documented time limits and monitoring procedures, also operates under informal queuing protocols. Incident reports reveal that disputes over phone access and waiting procedures have resulted in disciplinary actions. The scarcity of phones relative to inmate population, documented in facility capacity assessments, creates competition that unofficial social hierarchies attempt to regulate. Recreation and yard time operate under Maryland correctional regulations specifying minimum out-of-cell hours, but the actual use of these periods follows complex social arrangements. According to oversight reports and Inspector General findings, different areas of recreation yards become associated with particular groups. Basketball courts, weight equipment, and walking tracks develop informal scheduling and access patterns. New inmates unfamiliar with these arrangements may inadvertently violate boundaries that carry social consequences. Mail and correspondence, while regulated by documented censorship and security screening policies, also involve informal expectations. Letters from family members are precious commodities, and the social implications of outside support create status distinctions within the inmate population. Correctional staff training materials acknowledge that inmates with regular outside contact often demonstrate better institutional adjustment, though the social dynamics this creates among the inmate population remain largely unaddressed in official policy. Work assignments within Baltimore facilities follow official classification and security clearance procedures documented in departmental regulations, but the desirability of particular jobs and the informal influence involved in assignments constitute an unwritten aspect of institutional life. Court testimony in cases involving institutional corruption has revealed instances where job assignments became subject to informal negotiation. Inspector General investigations have documented cases where the official assignment process was compromised, though such incidents represent violations of established policy rather than accepted practice. Cell assignments and housing unit placements follow classification criteria established in Maryland correctional policy, considering factors including security level, criminal history, and behavioral record. The initial shock of entering Baltimore's correctional system eventually gives way to a more profound challenge: long-term adaptation to an environment fundamentally different from free society. According to research published in correctional psychology journals, this adaptation process involves psychological, social, and behavioral changes that can have lasting effects extending well beyond an individual's period of incarceration. Time operates differently within institutional walls. Documented daily schedules in Maryland correctional facilities follow rigid routines governed by count times, meal periods, and programmed activities. However, the subjective experience of time, what researchers term doing time, represents one of the most challenging aspects of incarceration. Studies published in criminal justice literature indicate that the monotony of institutional routine, combined with separation from normal temporal markers like seasons, holidays, and personal milestones, creates unique psychological stresses that inmates must learn to manage. Mental health challenges constitute a significant concern within Baltimore's correctional population. According to data from the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, a substantial percentage of inmates enter the system with pre-existing mental health conditions. Documented screening procedures identify individuals requiring mental health services, and Maryland policy mandates access to psychiatric care and medication management. However, the prevalence of mental illness within correctional settings, documented in public health research, exceeds community rates significantly, creating challenges for both treatment provision and institutional management. The impact of separation from family represents one of the most difficult aspects of incarceration. Research published in family studies journals documents the strain that incarceration places on marriages, parent-child relationships, and extended family systems. Maryland correctional facilities provide visitation opportunities governed by documented policies, but the practical barriers, including distance, visiting hours that conflict with work schedules, and the emotional difficulty of maintaining relationships through institutional visits create significant obstacles. Studies tracking recidivism rates have found strong correlations between maintained family connections and successful reintegration, highlighting the importance of these relationships. Educational opportunities within Baltimore's correctional system operate according to documented program offerings and eligibility criteria. Maryland law mandates educational services for inmates lacking high school credentials, and various vocational training programs are available based on facility resources and inmate classification. Research evaluating correctional education programs has documented positive outcomes in terms of reduced recidivism and improved post-release employment prospects. However, program availability, waiting lists, and security classifications create barriers that prevent universal access. Substance abuse treatment represents a critical component of correctional programming, particularly given documented rates of substance use disorders among incarcerated populations. Maryland's correctional system provides various levels of substance abuse intervention, from educational programs to intensive residential treatment, according to documented program descriptions. Research published in addiction medicine journals indicates that correctional settings present unique opportunities for intervention, as individuals may be more receptive to treatment when faced with the consequences of substance-related behavior. However, the availability of contraband substances within correctional facilities, documented in incident reports and interdiction statistics, creates ongoing challenges for those attempting recovery. Physical health deteriorates under conditions of incarceration according to public health research tracking correctional populations. Limited physical activity, institutional diet, stress, and exposure to communicable diseases create health risks documented in medical literature. Maryland Correctional Health Services operate under constitutional standards requiring adequate medical care, but the challenges of providing comprehensive health care in a custodial environment are well documented in oversight reports and court proceedings. Chronic conditions including diabetes, hypertension, and infectious diseases require ongoing management that must be coordinated through institutional medical services. However, the social implications of particular housing assignments create an informal status system. Documented gang intelligence reports indicate that certain housing units become associated with particular affiliations, creating challenges for inmates and correctional staff alike. Classification committees, according to procedural documentation, attempt to make assignments that minimize these conflicts while maintaining security and operational efficiency. Religious services and programming are constitutionally protected rights, governed by First Amendment precedent and documented in Maryland correctional policy. Various faith traditions receive accommodation through chaplaincy services and volunteer religious programming. However, the social dynamics surrounding religious participation extend beyond official policy. Research published in corrections journals indicates that religious programming provides both spiritual support and social networking opportunities, creating complex motivations for participation that correctional administrators must consider in program management. Educational and rehabilitative programming operates under documented eligibility criteria and curriculum standards, but participation often carries informal social implications. GED preparation, vocational training, and substance abuse treatment programs are documented in Maryland's correctional programming materials as evidence-based interventions intended to reduce recidivism. However, participation in such programs can be viewed differently within inmate culture, creating social pressures that operate independently of official encouragement. Disciplinary procedures follow extensive due process requirements established by constitutional precedent and codified in Maryland regulations. Documented procedures provide for hearings, appeals, and defined sanctions for rule violations. However, the informal social consequences of being labeled an informant or cooperating with institutional investigations operate outside this official framework. Court records from civil rights cases have documented instances where inmates faced retaliation for cooperation with authorities, despite official policies prohibiting such retaliation. The totality of these unwritten rules creates what correctional researchers term the inmate code, an informal social structure that exists alongside official regulations. Academic research published in criminology journals documents how this dual system creates unique challenges for institutional management and inmate adjustment. 4 new inmates in Baltimore's facilities, learning to navigate both the written rules and the unwritten expectations constitutes a survival skill that often determines their institutional experience. The phenomenon of institutionalization, where individuals become so adapted to institutional life that community reintegration becomes difficult, has been extensively documented in correctional research. Long-term inmates may develop dependencies on the structure, routine, and clear expectations of institutional life that make the ambiguity and self-direction required in free society overwhelming. Studies of long-term incarceration effects indicate that decision-making abilities, social skills, and basic life management capacities can atrophy with extended institutionalization. Pre-release planning and reentry preparation have become increasingly emphasized in correctional policy as research has demonstrated their importance for successful community reintegration. Maryland's correctional system provides various reentry services documented in program materials, including assistance with identification documents, housing resources, employment connections, and continuation of mental health or substance abuse treatment. However, the documented recidivism rates, the percentage of released inmates who return to custody, indicate that successful reintegration remains challenging despite these interventions. The collateral consequences of incarceration extend far beyond the period of custody itself. Legal barriers to employment, housing, education, and civic participation documented in Maryland statutes and regulations create ongoing obstacles for individuals with criminal records. Research published in sociology and criminology journals has documented how these collateral consequences contribute to recidivism by limiting legitimate opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals. Reform efforts documented in legislative proceedings have attempted to address some of these barriers, though significant obstacles remain. For those serving lengthy sentences in Baltimore's correctional facilities, maintaining hope and purpose represents an ongoing psychological challenge. Research in correctional psychology has documented various coping mechanisms that long-term inmates develop, from religious faith to artistic expression to engagement in self-improvement activities. The availability of meaningful activities and programs, documented as varying significantly across facilities and security levels, can profoundly impact an individual's ability to maintain mental health and personal growth during incarceration. The ultimate reality that new inmates in Baltimore must confront is that incarceration represents more than temporary removal from society. It constitutes a transformative experience with lifelong implications. The rules, both written and unwritten, that initially shock new arrivals become the framework of daily existence. Understanding these rules, adapting to institutional life while maintaining personal dignity and humanity, and preparing for eventual reintegration into free society represent the ongoing challenges that define the correctional experience. According to comprehensive research on correctional outcomes, successful navigation of incarceration and reentry depends on multiple factors including individual resilience, social support, institutional programming, and community resources. For the thousands of individuals who pass through Baltimore's correctional facilities each year, the shock of entry eventually transforms into the long-term reality of adaptation, survival, and, for many, eventual return to the communities from which they came, carrying with them the lasting impacts of their institutional experience.